It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The moment I start the talk is when the door opens and another 10 people come in. Bye-bye. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to my talk. Glad to have you here. I'm Jonas. I'm working for Eclipse Source. We are a service provider and we help our customers to build tools on the desktop and on the web. And today, if my screen unlocks again, I would like to talk about Theia and Che, explain and explore. Quick question, who of you has attended the talk in this room before? Okay, so it would have been better the other way around, because the last talk was a lot about advanced stuff in Theia and Che. The goal of this talk is actually the following. If you look at the program of EclipseCon, there are a lot of talks about Che and Theia, and many of those talks are about technical details, like how to do this with Theia, how to do that with Che, how to deploy, and whatnot. And I think it's very valuable to have those technical in detail talks. But if you talk to people about Che and Theia, there are actually two groups. One group is completely aware of those two projects and maybe is already using them. And there's this other group who actually heard about them, but doesn't really have a clue what those projects are. So I'm targeting today in this talk the second group. My goal is to provide an overview, like a really basic overview of those two projects. So my detailed goal is to answer the question, what is it? What are the core features? How can you use it? I will show some demonstrations. How can you extend it? Although I will not provide too much technical details. And how, and that's an interesting question, how do those technologies relate to each other? So how does Che relate to Theia? How does Theia relate to VS Code? And what are the connections? So my hope is, and my goal for today is that if you leave the talk, you have a better understanding, okay, how to use those technologies, are they interesting for you? And maybe that helps you to select among the other talks tomorrow and the day after, which particular framework interests you. So this is really meant as a beginner talk. For Theia and Che, I will start with Theia. So what is actually Eclipse Theia, the project? Theia is a platform for building web-based tools and IDEs. It's very similar to the original purpose of the Eclipse platform. So Eclipse has been invented as a platform for building tools, and it's exactly the same purpose for web-based tools. So the idea is that you can use Theia to create your own tools or extensions based on that. Now there is already a name confusion there because you could also search for the Theia to download the Theia IDE. There are some products available based on Theia, but you can actually not really use Theia itself. I mean, Theia is a platform, and what you actually use are products based on Theia. Although, as for Eclipse before, I mean, Eclipse, the name, there were double meanings. Eclipse was the platform, but the IDE was also called Eclipse, although the formal name was, for example, Eclipse JDT, the development tools. But everybody said Eclipse. And the same is true for Theia. Now, what are the core features of such a platform? It's also very similar to the desktop version. First feature is a basic work frame. It provides you with a frame where you can place views, like for example, a file explorer, a terminal, a code editor. You can drag them around, you can create window layouts, you have a menu, you have commands, all this basic frame. Exactly what Eclipse provides on the desktop. Second feature is also similar to Eclipse, a modular extension mechanism. And the reason why this is so important is it allows you to two things. One is you can reuse a lot of existing stuff. So there are already a lot of extensions for you to reuse. And you can add your own extensions on top of that, and you can mix those two groups, like your own stuff with existing stuff, like you are used to in Eclipse, and then you can combine those two to a product which then fulfills all the requirements you need. This is only possible if you have a modular extension mechanism. In the desktop world for Eclipse, it was OSGI. Theia has its own modular extension mechanism. Actually, two of them, I will go more into detail about that. And the third, I've already covered that a bit. There are common tool features already implemented for you, and the platform provides them. Again, similar to Eclipse. So for example, if you want to build a tool for your custom language and you want to provide that to your customers, you also want Git support. Now, if you don't use a platform, you have to implement that yourself. If you use Theia, there's already an extension providing Git support, and you can reuse that. Same as for a debug view, for a code editor, and so on. So the benefit of having common features available in combination with this modularity allows you to reuse a lot of stuff and therefore lower the costs to develop a custom tool, basically. And that's the purpose of such a platform. Now, simple question, how to launch Theia. So there is no download. You cannot just download an executable to launch Theia. I mean, it's a tool which is targeted at to run in the web. You can actually deploy it in two different ways. You can either bundle a product based on Theia with Electron and run it as a desktop app. And the second deployment type is you deploy it in the cloud and then access it via a browser. That's one of the core strengths of Theia, that you can do both. But if you want to try out Theia, like how do you launch it? Theia is a platform. Again, there's no product called Theia. And it's a collection of existing extensions. That's the name of a module in Theia. And technically, those extensions are Node packages. So if you're familiar with Node, that's kind of a bundle in the Node.js world. Now, to launch Theia, what you need to do is you want to configure your own product based on Theia. It's basically create an own package JSON and add all the extensions you want to start. You can use a predefined product if you don't want to do that. There are a couple of those products out there. Either you just use a pre-configured package JSON, or you can also use Docker. There are some pre-configured containers that you can just launch. You can use Theia within Che, because Theia is the default IDE in Che, and we will see that later. Or you can use any other product which uses Theia as an IDE. And the more and more Theia will adapt it, the more likely it is that you click some button at some web page and then a tool opens up which is actually based on Theia. So you are using Theia then in a custom product of any vendor. Now, how to use Theia? I would like to give a quick demo. In the last talk we have seen a very much customized version of Theia, but they didn't show the basic features. I really want to show the basic features that you get a feeling on how Theia looks like today and how to use it. I could do easily a 10 hours demonstration of all the features. I have to focus on some. What I want to show is the basics. I want to show a command which is really very present in Theia, and if you know VS Code, you're familiar with that. That's commands. That is the idea is that you have a quick access to frequently used actions. Instead of using the mouse, you can just type them in and there's auto-completion, pretty much like in VS Code. I want to show the terminal, because Theia has a terminal integrated, which allows you to access any command line interface tool that you would like to use. And the three features I want to show is the Git workflow. As an example, I would like to show the language support in Java, and I would quickly demonstrate the debugger, because I think those are the three most prominent features that show a pretty good spectrum of what is available in Theia. So let me start Theia. I have to sit down though. So let me go down. What I will do for the demo is I will start Theia locally on my machine. Of course, you could also deploy that on the server or in Che, but I will just do that locally. Now Theia is running. As you might see, it starts really fast. Now, let's go here, and let's browse to an empty workspace. And let's just reload it. So you see that the color has changed because the IDE was preloaded, and now it knows it's online again, so now this IDE is fully functional. So as you can see, there are views. So this, for example, is the file view, where I can create a new file. And maybe I should make it bigger. Is it readable? No. Why does this not work? Better? Okay, maybe like this. Is this fine? Okay. So now I can open the file. I can type something in here. Now so The UI is, if you're used to an IDE, it's pretty much what you expect. So there are menus. You can switch between the different views here. For example, this is the Explorer. This is the commit view. This is the history. Currently, there is no history. What I want to show is this commands feature that I've talked about before. And for many actions, they are available somewhere in the menu, but also as commands. For example, currently, I don't have a Git repository. And I want to initialize that. So I can either browse to the SCM view and click this button here to initialize that, or, and that's quicker because you don't have to leave the keyboard, I press F1, which opens this command view, and I type in init, and that automatically shows me, okay, there's an option to initialize a repository. And then I just press enter, and then my repository is initialized. The thing is, a lot of stuff is available in the UI. Much more is available via commands. And if you're still missing a feature, you can still execute it down here because that provides access to the underlying machine. So for example, here I can do a list and I see, okay, this README file is there. So let's do a commit. First commit, and I press Control Enter. Oh, I haven't staged something. So I can either stage here manually, or I can again use a command, stage all. So if I have everything, if I want to commit everything, and then I press Control Enter, and then now I have my first commit. What I want to show, because that's also an interesting feature, let me do some changes here and do another commit, like this, and let me stage that again. If I, oh sorry, I didn't want that, like this. If I have a change here, before I actually commit it, I can also compare that. So Theia supports a compare view. And for that, I just double click here and I see a nice visualization of the changes. So all those basic features that you actually expect from a UI are already there. I can look at the history here. So for example, here's my commit. I can look at the changes and I can compare them again. So all this basic stuff. Okay, let's switch to language support. So currently I only have a README file. So let me create a Java project. Now, this is a very good example. Like the basic version of Theia doesn't have a UI to create a Java project. I would need to do that manually. But what comes in very handy here is that I have access to the underlying terminal. And it's a very good paradigm of Theia. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. There is actually good tooling out there to create a Java project, for example, Maven. So instead of recreating everything from scratch, I can basically just use Maven to create my Java project. So let me do that. I access now the terminal down here. And let me copy the command because it was too long to memorize that. Like this. And now I just call Maven to create an archetype Java project. It generates that on the underlying machine. Hopefully that doesn't take so long. It asks me for some parameters. So that's my group, my artifact version, just like this. And now it generates the Java project. And you can see down here Maven is running, and down here the Explorer shows me the result, which is now a full Java project. I can open that. And now I can, for example, open the app.java. And now we dive into code editing. What you actually see here is that the code editor supports syntax highlighting. So all the keywords are marked. And if I type something which is no keyword, it wouldn't be marked. Just like this. But it also provides auto-completion. And the reason or how this actually works is that Theia in the back has this language server which looks at the files and understands the Java project, and it transfers that via the language server protocol to my client. And for that reason, I can actually, for example, type system dot, and it shows me now, okay, what are the possibilities, just like this, for example. So if you're used to a Java IDE like Eclipse, it's maybe like the right-click options are maybe not as complete as in Eclipse, but the general code editing feels very much the same. Another very interesting example for that is if I add another method, static void, just like this, maybe just leave it empty. You see that if I call it here, it automatically suggests me that, so it also understands my code. And now I can also trigger a refactoring here. So I can call refactor, and then, for example, I can fix this typo. Nope. Somehow I left this mode. Anyway, I will not fix that now, but usually that works so that you can rename stuff. So it is a clever code editor. It really feels well. The third thing, and of course I could run my Java app now here. The third thing I would like to demo, because that's a recent addition and also very powerful thing, is the debug view that's implemented via the debug adapter protocol. And for that, I will switch to another workspace that I've opened. This workspace actually shows the sources of Theia itself. So it's the workspace. So this is the source code of Theia, and it is actually possible to develop extensions or even Theia itself using Theia, so you can bootstrap it. And what I've done here, I've set a breakpoint in the commit method. And now what I can do is I can launch Theia in the debug mode and open that in another browser window. So that's running on another port. So this is now the Theia under development. And let's just trigger a commit here. Oh, I have to add some changes. Just like this. Now you see nothing should happen. Why does something happen? Ah, no, it is actually here. So now the debugger stands here. I can look at the variables, I can look at the closures, everything, and I can even step through, as you see here. So I could now debug the commit directly in my Theia IDE. And I think this is really powerful. It fulfills all the basic use cases that you are used to as a developer. Okay, now let me switch back to my presentation. Now we've shown all those features, so let's sum that up a bit. What are the key features of Eclipse Theia? And maybe we already compared it a bit to VS Code. So the first key feature, it's based on modern web technology, TypeScript, HTML, CSS. You can see that UI looks very nice. You can zoom, you can change the theme. So, and if your developers like to use HTML5, TypeScript, and so on, that's really an advantage. This is the same as VS Code. So the UI technology is basically the same. It integrates LSP and the Monaco editor. The Monaco editor, this is the code editor in the middle, where I showed you the auto-completion, syntax highlighting, and so on. That's also exactly the same technology used in VS Code. Now let's talk a little bit about the unique features of Theia. Theia has been developed from the start to run online and offline. So I've shown you, I started the server on my machine and accessed and opened it in the browser, but that's actually the remote case. So you could start the server on some remote machine and then use it in the browser. But alternatively, you can also deploy a Theia app via Electron as a desktop app that users can download and run locally. VS Code at the moment is targeted at the desktop case, so it runs in Electron. Although it's very likely that, or it's almost sure that this will not hold. VS Code is obviously going to the cloud too. There are some announcements pointing in this direction. The next thing, and I really like that about Theia doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. So it makes a really good, or it does a really good job in reusing what's there. One example is the Monaco editor. So this component was already there, and it just reused it from VS Code. So as a result, we have a very strong and very good component there instead of something which was rewritten only for Theia. And it does the same in other areas too. Like, for example, the Maven support. You can use it on the command line, and people today, they like to do stuff on the command line. Thea adds some UI on top where it makes sense, for example, for committing stuff, entering the commit message, comparing, staging, but a lot of the actions can be done on the command line and via commands. And therefore, the code base of Thea is actually surprisingly small, but in turn well maintained. Thea is vendor neutral. It's hosted at the Eclipse Foundation, and a lot of different companies contribute to that, so that's very promising. VS Code is open source too, but you could argue it's pretty much like controlled by Microsoft still. That you can consider that to be good or bad. Thea is definitely more diverse. And finally, and that's also a difference to VS Code, Thea is very extensible because it has been built for that purpose to be the basis of a custom platform from the beginning. In Thea, actually, everything is an extension. So all the parts of the application, like for example, the existing Git support, the code editor, the terminal, all the menus, they are already implemented as extension. So there is no difference between anything that is part of the platform and something that you would add. Every extension plays by the same rules, and that means it's very easy to completely extend Thea and also replace existing behavior. The mechanism used for that is dependency injection, which is really flexible. So if you want to build a white label product where you really, which really looks completely custom, like this thing that we have seen before in the talk before, this would be difficult in VS Code because it has a limited API for the extension use case, while Thea has really this powerful extension mechanism. Talking about extensions, there are actually two mechanisms to extend Thea. One is, and that's what I already mentioned, the extension mechanism. In fact, every Eclipse Thea application or product consists of a number of extensions. Just like an OCI application is a number of bundles, this is exactly the same for Thea. And you can slice and dice them as you like. So you can reuse existing ones, like 2 of them on this slide, and you can add your own extensions to create a product with the features you like. And all those extensions communicate using dependency injection. So in case you didn't join the talk before, let me quickly show you what you could actually do. Oh, I have to switch node versions here. Okay, let me go here and open another workspace. So what I'm about to show you is a product that is based on Thea, but that has been heavily customized to actually look completely different than Thea itself. So it adds a lot of new features. So let me switch the workspace here and go in here, just like this. So here you see the light theme of Thea, so it looks completely different. And for example, if I double click here, now you see a view which has nothing to do with code editing, where you can actually see a form-based editor, and I can, for example, open this control unit, and then it's more like an engineering tools where you can enter data. Another example of a customization would be a diagram editor, as you can see here, where you can do, for example, an activity diagram. And all this has been implemented using custom extensions that have been plugged in together with existing Thea extensions to a new product. So this is one mechanism. There is a second one called a Thea plugin. The reason why this was actually invented is extensions have been there from the beginning, and the whole architecture of Thea is actually based on those extensions. And initially, it was also possible to deploy them via runtime. However, extensions have one disadvantage, and that is if you implement something in an extension, you have access to everything in Thea. You can customize everything, but you can also harm the stability of the application. Now, if you create your own product and you have everything under control, this is actually a good thing because you know exactly what you do. Now, if you think more about something like VS Code, where you have a base product and you want to allow users to provide plugins that you can install into a product and into an existing product, this is actually dangerous because if you give all the users complete freedom, they will make the IDE slow or unstable or whatever. And also extensions, it was not easy to deploy them via runtime. Let's phrase it like that. Now, to solve this problem, the Theia team actually invented a second mechanism of extension, and that's called a plugin. And the idea is there's one plugin in Theia, one extension that you can install called the plugin extension. And this provides a dedicated API that can be used by plugins. Now, this API is restricted, it's much smaller, and also plugins run in a separate process, so they cannot harm the stability. In turn, this API is a little bit simpler to use because you can look at the API and you see, okay, this is what I'm expected to do with my plugin. It covers the most common use case. So it's easier, less powerful, but basically easier if your use case is covered by that API. Now, before Theia actually created its own new plugin API, they did something very clever, and that is they looked at VS Code. Because VS Code has exactly this approach. It has a plugin API, and it also runs plugins in a separate process. And the good decision that I really love is instead of inventing a new API, the Theia plugin API is compatible with the VS Code one. And that means you can write a plugin which runs in Theia, but also in VS Code, and you can reuse VS Code plugins in Theia too. And that actually works today with some limitations I will mention in a second. But that opens up the huge ecosystem of VS Code plugins to be used in Theia too. Now, about that, so Theia provides almost the same API as VS Code. Almost the same means it's not fully completed yet. So some parts of the API of VS Code are not yet there. But you can actually, if you want to use your favorite VS Code extension in Theia, you can install it and test that. About the installation, while technically it's actually possible to install something from the VS Code marketplace into Theia just by typing in the ID of that, that's disallowed by the terms of use of the Microsoft Marketplace. So don't do that. What you can do instead is go to the original source of that plugin, and hopefully you find download there on the GitHub repository, and then you can download and install it into Theia. Okay, so enough about Theia. Let's switch to Che. If you look on the clock, you might notice that we talked a lot now about Theia, and we will only have 5 minutes for Che. Reason for that is Che solves at least as much features for you in an online scenario. But for a developer, typically all this stuff runs in the background. So there's not so much to demo, while Theia provides all the features that you use as a developer, like code, Git, all this stuff. Che is basically an enabler. So what does Che do? If we think about how to deploy Theia in a remote scenario, we want to run it on a server. But the interesting question is the terminal down there in Theia, where does this point to? So what happens if I trigger, let's say, a compilation or a Maven command or this language server? Where do those things run in? So we need some online runtime or container where the development tools that the user uses via the browser actually run in. And if you imagine you not only have one developer, but 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, we need some server solution which is capable of managing those runtimes. And this is exactly what Che does. So Che is a workspace server, so we call those runtimes on the server workspaces. They contain the sources, but also the tools that you can work with those sources. And it allows to manage those runtime and workspace on the server. That means users can log in, they can create workspaces, they can share them with colleagues, you can assign resources to developers. You have control on how many resources developers use and so on. So, and those workspaces are managed as containers. Che actually does that by using Kubernetes. You can share them. Yes, I mentioned all that. And the connection is very simple. Che uses Theia as the default IDE. You can actually also use other IDEs in Che. For example, there is an online version of the classic Eclipse IDE. If you haven't seen that, I recommend to have a look. It's pretty cool. So you can actually use the classic Eclipse IDE in the browser. But Theia is the default IDE, so that's what you get if you don't change that. And what Che also does, it provides some pre-configured products based on Theia. So if you use Che, you don't have to configure your own Theia product based on all the extensions. You just get something which is working and which contains some additional extensions and plugins that are focused on, or that are actually provided by the Eclipse Che team. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. So this is now online, hopefully. Let me see. Yeah, let me start that. Okay. So this is how Che looks like. This is actually running online on OpenShift. Here I see a list of my workspaces. I just launched one that I can demo it in a second. But I can also just create a new one. So let's click there. What you see here is what they call a stack. A stack is a pre-configured, or is a configuration how my runtime will look like. It's basically the selection of tools that I want to install into my online runtime. And they do a good job in providing defaults. So for example, if I want to develop Java with Maven, I can click this stack. And it contains what you typically need, like it contains Java, Maven, and some additional tools. Down here, I can select if I want to an existing project to check out. If I select, for example, an example project, Che will start my workspace and automatically check this out. So I can basically just by click and create and open, launch my workspace and then already having some example code. The stacks are configurable, so there's a number of pre-defined stacks here. You can consider this to be like virtual machines that you can actually use online for your development. So for example, we have Node.js down here, Java, different C++ development, whatever you like. Now let's look at how this, or let's have a look on how this looks like. So you see this looks familiar because that's Eclipse Che again. So Che is now running online Theia is running online in Che. You can see this view is new because that's actually added by Che as an extension. But if I close this and this, I have now again a plain Eclipse Theia that I can use for development within Che. Okay. Ways how to extend Che. So whenever you extend Che, whatever you can do with Theia can also affect Che, because if you run Theia in Che and start to extend the Theia IDE, that will also affect what you get if you open a workspace. But only for Che, you can customize the stacks that I've shown you, meaning the pre-configured runtimes that developers can use. You can customize so-called Che plugins. Che plugins are a special thing that is combining Theia plugins, meaning features that are added to your IDE, but those Che plugins can also add features to the underlying runtime. So if, for example, if you have a Theia plugin which provides Maven support in the UI, but it requires Maven to be installed on the runtime, you can bundle those two things into one Che Theia plugin. That's how they call it. And then you can click that in the Che IDE to add that to your online workspace. And you can add your own custom editor. So instead of using Theia, you could also use another web IDE, and they provide a few out of the box. You can have a look at that. If you go to the workspace configuration, you can actually select among several editors. And with that, let me come to the conclusion. So Eclipse Theia and Eclipse Che. So Eclipse Theia is the IDE framework, a platform to build web-based IDEs that can run on the desktop via Electron or online, while Che is a framework to manage your developer runtimes online. It uses Theia as a default IDE, so it's basically a possibility to provide containers for Theia to run in, but also provides other editors. But at the end, those projects are closely connected. Theia versus VS Code. Theia reuses a lot of components from VS Code, especially the Monaco editor. The usability of both is very similar. Currently, Theia has the online use case as an advantage, but that might not be the case forever. Theia is more extensible because it has this extension mechanism, and it is hosted at the Eclipse Foundation. Theia extensions versus Theia plugins versus Che Theia plugins. Theia extensions are the powerful mechanism where you can do everything, but you cannot install during runtime, and you basically you don't want to give anybody the capability to extend your product with that because they can harm stability. Plugins can be deployed during runtime. They have a limited API, but they're running in an own process. This API is similar to the VS Code one, so you can reuse VS Code plugins in Theia and the other way around with some limitations, so you need to test that. And a Che Theia plugin is the combination of a Theia plugin with the underlying runtime dependencies that are deployed on the container via a sidecar. Now, additional technologies you might be interested in this context are the GLSP for diagrams, Sprotty, underlying technology of GLSP again for diagrams, or EMF Cloud. All of those have been presented in the last talk. And with that, I would like to come to an end. I hope that this overview was useful to you to just see, okay, this is how the tool looks like, this is what I can do. Is it interesting for me or not? Maybe tomorrow, maybe in 1 month, and maybe in 1 year. I'm happy to take any questions now in a second. If you don't have a question now, or maybe your question comes later, please also feel free to get in contact with me. I will be typically at our booth on the other side of this venue, or just drop me an email if you want any advice on your project, or you want to know, like, how can we build this, how can we build that. And with that, are there any questions right now? Yes.